This conference will now be recorded.
There you go. Okay. Next piece of action is to review the agenda. Uh, you all had a chance to look at it. Are there any additions or changes you'd like to make? Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And thanks for your work and the PC staff for setting up the agenda. Um, and I see Ken has his hand up, which is great. Um, I know the agenda was circulated with a couple of materials. They were from Ken, and that's great. And I know the work needs to be accelerated. But I wonder if we could take a few minutes to discuss like what's the process for um, committee members to be submitting and having documents circulated in front of the group, for consideration. I think it can work fine as long as it's working, but I think if things are just showing up and they aren't, committee or group things or things that the full committee ordered, and we get later in the process, things could get a little anarchic. So I think it's a short conversation, but I think it's an important one to have at the outset. I still feel like we're in the forming stage of this group, and having some kind of a process for everything will save us time later.
Sure. Let's hear from Ken first, and then I'll offer some initial thoughts.
Great,
Ken?
thank you.
Yep.
Um, yeah, just in terms of the agenda, it's a short thing, but in section 5, I'm hoping that the PUC can provide us an update status on the February 15th legislative report.
Okay.
But then to get to Brian's comment, I agree, except we all have to acknowledge that I work best under anarchic conditions.
Well, okay. Let me just say that I want to add one final opportunity for public comment at the end. We have two opportunities during the subject matter discussions for public comment. I'll add one last one at the end. Uh, and uh, although this agenda had the uh, you know the hope of not taking more than not going the full 3 hours. I have a feeling we're going to get close to the 3 hours today. So somewhere at the hour and a half mark, we might want to take a short 5-minute break. So I'll add that as the opportunity arises. Uh, Brian, my initial reaction to what you say is I agree. In the case of the two memos that, in this particular case, of the two memos that Ken offered, since they both relate to discussions that we were planning to have today, it seemed to me that they fit right in, that they would be a point of departure for some discussion. It seems to me, as a general matter, that members of the group should feel free to, as you say, to communicate with the group and put ideas forth and raise them for discussion. Uh, how how best, what kind of process is needed for that? Let's have that discussion right now. Let's take 5 minutes, and I want to hear what folks have to say about that. But insofar as uh, uh, folks on the committee have, will have thoughts about things. It seems to me a great way to get them across to everybody in advance of a meeting so that they're right, they may be ripe for discussion. Um, this, I think, partly relates or could relate to the question of working groups, subgroups as well, and how that information from the groups gets, first of all, gets developed and then returned to the committee. In that sense, I say the group, the tag rather. In that sense, the subgroup would be given a task, and we would expect to hear back from them, and then have a discussion on what it is they provided to us. So I see individual input in sort of the same way, but I agree we don't want it to be the cause of confusion and chaos. Any thoughts from other members? And of course, Brian too. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, sure. I'll just open. I think, again, no, there's no aspersions on the product that we saw, but I think it's like you said, Rick. The way I'm used to working in groups like this large, is like there's the main group, and the group has a discussion, and then during the course of a meeting, they decide, we want to get additional information on this particular topic, and then they assign that to either a subcommittee or potentially an individual, and then that group or individual works on the product, and then it's brought back to the committee, so that products are not just being brought forward at the at the discretion or the pleasure of individual committee members, so that there's some kind of there's a process. The full committee says we want to hear on this, and the full committee says, and here are the people, preferably like the people and not a person that develops the product, to bring back to the full committee for consideration. I think, again, I'm trying to avoid a situation where we get deep into the process and, one or the other individuals, because it's happened before, have said, oh, I have an opinion on this. Here's my memo on what we should do. And now we're talking about that, out of sequence or out of context, or out of the context of a request from the committee for, an opinion or study on a particular topic, of which we have many, and appreciating that we do have a lot of work to do. So it needs to end in a very short time. So that would have to happen. But that's the way I envision, that's my proposal for how we should work. Committee discusses, determines what additional information or what work needs to happen outside of this committee. That's assigned to a group, and then the group brings the product back to the committee as listed in the agenda for whatever the deadline is. Do we need that in the form of a motion, Dominic?
It is, you do not have to have it as a motion. If you would like this to be a decision the group makes to officially set those standards, then we would need it in the form of a motion.
Okay. Oh, Brian, before we go any further, before we decide whether we need a motion, Brian, I don't want to inhibit group members from bringing forth thoughts, ideas, concerns, as you say, appropriately in the process. But if all we do is instruct a subgroup or an individual member to go off and do something and come back, then we inhibit the member from raising an issue that we might not have otherwise thought of?
I think that happens during the discussion of the full committee. I certainly don't feel, restrained from saying, I think we need to talk about this. But I think what I'm trying to avoid, and forgive me for, a kind of a repetition, is I think outside of the meeting, we need to talk about this, or I have an opinion about this. And Ken decides, oh, well, outside of the meeting, I'm going to write a memo about this other thing. And then someone else says, oh, no, I'm going to bring this to this. And this all comes to you. The work's not in order, and the work isn't, been approved or requested by the committee.
Okay.
So that discussion happens during the group meetings, and then the group decides collectively, yes, we want to have this product, and it decides, and here's either the person or the group that we feel is the most appropriate to develop that product.
Okay, so I hear you then. Then this relates to our process in two ways. One is it can become a matter of agenda setting. So, Brian, you have an issue and you say, you contact the chair and say, gee, can you put this on the agenda for the next meeting? And that would meet your concern, because it would then be part of the process, and then the group as a whole would decide what to do with whatever it is you had proposed, and then we'd be fine. Is that what you're saying? Am I
Yeah, I think
Yep.
that's
Okay.
that's a version of it.
Okay. Well, that works for me. Others, any thoughts? Ken?
Yeah, and I can be reminded if I'm wrong, but I thought at the end of the last meeting, we did determine that the two topics that I sent memos on were going to be topics of this agenda, and that's the emissions accounting and credit ownership. So that, I'll say that's how it came about in my mind is I knew these topics were going to be addressed, and I just thought it'd be helpful to have some thoughts put in writing, not that after the meeting, I said, "Oh, we really need to talk about this," and then I sent a memo. I believe that the sequence is that these two items were going to be on the agenda.
And they are. I think in this case we're okay, but in the future we'll follow the process that Brian suggests. Does that make sense for folks? Right?
Rick Luce has had her hand up for
Oh,
several
I'm
minutes.
sorry. I'm sorry, Luce.
That's
Please.
okay. I just wanted to say, I think we're going to find this in our agenda today when we look at our tasks and we determine which subgroups we need. And then any member could send information to the subgroup on that topic, right? And the subgroup, in my mind, it's like what Brian says, they decipher all the comments, but we would still be able to comment to a subgroup. It just would be flushed out, right, by that subgroup, preferably, before it comes to the full committee. Does that make sense, right? It's the same concept, but you still have a chance to give your views on any of the topics, but it would go to the subcommittee first to work on it.
I think yes, if there is one. Yeah.
If there is one. If there isn't one, that's where it gets messier. Right.
Well, it would still come back to the full group anyway.
Right.
You'd always have that opportunity for the full group. Okay. Let's see. There's another hand up. I'm sorry, Dominic.
Rick, yes, it's mine. Just to Luce's point, appreciate the idea. I think that would be an efficient way to work. I just want to remind everybody of the applicability importance of open meeting laws. Things that are sent for consideration in a public meeting, wonderful. We just can't be having substantive conversations about those items outside of the public view.
Right, and we're going to have that conversation in just a moment when we talk about the subgroups. Great. Okay, if we're good on that, we'll move to the next item, which is review and approval of the minutes of the two previous meetings. We have a revised set of minutes from our first meeting and a set of minutes from our second meeting. So let's start with the first meeting. That was the December meeting. And Dominic, I'm going to try to follow the Robert's Rules of Order as well as I can. But I think it's appropriate that we just start with a discussion about it, and then we go to a motion, and then have a discussion on the motion. Is that correct?
The following Robert's rules, there would be a motion to approve the minutes. Then there would open up debate on that. That would be time for conversation about any other changes that might need to be made. As those are resolved, we can move and dispense with that motion.
Okay. Well then, may I have a motion to approve the revised minutes of the December, I don't remember the date, meeting?
So moved.
TJ, second.
Brian Wood, second.
Great, thank you. Any discussion? The revised minutes have show the changes that we discussed in our last meeting. Are there any other questions or revisions about them, for them? Okay, well, if not, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye or raising a hand. How do we do it best in
Aye.
The easiest way will be to either use the hand raise function or raise your hand on camera.
Okay. All opposed? The ayes have it. I see none opposed. Okay, thank you. The minutes of our January meeting, was that the 19th, I believe? May we have a motion for approval of those?
I'll move to
I'll move
approve the
approval.
January minutes. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that TJ again?
Yeah, I moved approval. This is Ken.
Okay, a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, TJ. Any discussion? I'll start by saying I noticed one line that I thought might need amendment. That's on page 3. Let me find mine for a moment here. Oh, there they are. On page 3, the sub bullet underneath, it's PUC to share status of work on the clean heat standard. Then there's the first sub bullet is commission staff, and there's a sub bullet to that in which begins in case number 23 220, 2220 rule. The commission issued orders on the topic tag system, early action credits, etc. I think the word topic is that meant to be there? It doesn't sound right to me. I think it could be removed unless I'm missing something.
It's correct, Rick.
Okay. And then, of course, and then just at the very end of the minutes are the 2 lines that are deleted or they're strike through. I assume they can be deleted entirely.
Rick, could you clarify what line's got the strike through? I'm pulling up the meeting minutes now.
Oh, at the very end of the draft minutes, there are 2 bullets. They look like they were agenda items from which the notes were on which the notes were based, and they were struck through because we didn't use them. And I just assuming we can take them out entirely.
Yes, if the group feels it's important to do that, they were left in when I put these together just to signify that they were on the agenda but not reached. We want to acknowledge that it was intended and simply didn't get to it.
Okay, fine with me either way. Should we leave them in then? Okay.
If we leave them in, let's
Brian.
put a little. I'd put a little note because it's not obvious what striking them out means. But if just to say there were 2 items, on the agenda that were not covered during the meeting, I think describes what that strikeout represents.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, question for Dominic. For items we don't get to, do we need to table them at the end of the meeting?
I would have to consult to give a definitive answer on that. My assumption is in the strictest following of Robert's rules, yes, we would, because technically meetings don't end based on time in Robert's rule systems. Obviously, we need to respect people's times here, and so we're going to do that. If the group has the mutual understanding that items not reached in the time are in consideration for next meeting's agenda, that would also work. As we said before, whatever is most efficient for the group, we want to use these procedural tools to enable your work, not make it more complicated.
Great, yeah, then that's fine. If I think there will always be items we don't get to, and if the meeting notes, reflect that we weren't able to get to those items, even if they weren't tabled, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Great. Dominic, with these slight revisions, we can approve them without seeing them again. Is that not correct?
Correct. We would amend the pending motion to say with instruction to add a note for the struck items to explain that they were not reached. Pending that revision, this is approved, then the vote would be taken on that motion. Staff would make those revisions, and because they are ministerial, they will be considered approved, and we'll make those changes to get them uploaded.
And I would take that as a friendly amendment to my motion.
And we'll need a second for that. Sam
I'll,
seconds.
I'll second the amendment to Ken's motion.
Any discussion? If none, then all in favor signify by saying aye, or excuse me, raising your hand. Those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Great, this is good. Okay, item 4 on the agenda. We're back to discussing an election of a chair, or take action as appropriate. I'm vice chair. I'm acting as chair at the moment. I'll continue to do so. It seems to me that there are several courses of action we can take. One is for one of you find people to nominate yourself or be nominated to be chair, and we take that action. We can take no action, I suppose, or we could, reconsider the officers altogether. And no, not that I'm recommending this. We could name me chair, and I think, I can resign, and we can go through this, and then we have a vice chair. So there's various routes we can go on this. Let's talk about what we want to do. This discussion relates in part, it seems to me, to a discussion we're about to have shortly about that we're going to hear from the PUC and the ANR on potential facilitation for the group. And so the roles of the chair and vice chair, will depend in part on that. So maybe we're putting the cart a little bit before the horse, but let's start the discussion anyway. Brian, you have some thoughts?
Just to follow up from the last meeting, I know I was nominated. I said I needed to check with my leadership on that. I know Rick and the PUC staff know, but I don't think the rest of the committee knows. The agency feels that in order to avoid any perception that this process is being controlled by the administration in any way, I've been asked to respectfully decline the nomination for chair, but I would certainly welcome anyone to self-nominate to be able to serve in that capacity. And I'll just add, Rick, I certainly would support your service as chair of the group, should you be willing to do so.
Thank you. Others? God, this is such an enthusiastic group. Well, I know that, look, oh gosh, sure, I'll be chair. I mean, I'd be happy to be chair. I'll, if that makes sense, I'll do it. If no one else really wants to do it, or has the resources, the time, and can make the time to do it, I'd be happy to do it. I'd love to have a vice chair, because it's certainly going to be the case, or it certainly could be the case, that I'll miss a meeting. If we have facilitation, it's going to make this work a lot easier for us. So we'll have that conversation in a moment. Emily just suggested that she'd be willing to, Emily Levin would be willing to be vice chair. I know Sam Lair had, kindly suggested that he might be interested in it as well. Dominic, you just hit your microphone. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, Luce's hand is up.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Once again, Luce, I've missed you. Please,
That's
go
okay.
ahead.
I just didn't know if Ken Jones was interested, that's all. But that was before all these other people have offered to be it. So I was just, because looking for someone who's not tied to a group was what I was trying to look at.
Yeah, but Ken Jones is not interested. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well,
Sam Lear's hand is also up,
Sam, yep,
as
Sam.
well as Emily Levin.
Oh, great. Sam and then Emily.
Maybe it would be helpful if, could someone either put in the chat or maybe we could discuss it, just, what the responsibilities are for vice chair, just sort of in plain conversation here for the group. Maybe that would help move it along.
Sure. Dominic, you might have some words here. My first thought is the vice chair to consult with the chair and the PUC staff in the setting up of the agendas. Primary role is setting up the agendas and then running the meeting in the absence of the chair. Dominic?
Correct. The vice chair essentially has three roles. The first and least likely to occur is presiding over a meeting in the absence of a chair. Thank you, Deirdre put it in the chat. The vice chair is responsible for working with the chair to finalize the agenda and then sending it out to group members. So that's probably a call with the chair and a email out to the members. And then the vice chair is responsible for being the first set of eyes on draft meeting minutes and bringing any suggestions for revisions back to the group at the next meeting.
Great. Emily?
And then,
Oh, sorry. Emily?
Yeah, I was just gonna second the idea of Rick elevating to chair. I think that makes the most sense, and we need someone who has the ability to devote, the time this deserves for this process. It's a big job, and I think you're to do it.
Retirement. Okay. Well, then there ought to be, I assume at this point, if there's no more discussion, if there's other thoughts, we would entertain a motion. Now, what would be the best way to go about this, Dominic? A motion for both chair and vice chair, or should we do those separately?
the procedures do not specify. If the group would like to take this as one motion for chair and vice chair, that'd be welcome. I am hearing some consensus around chair. I'm not sure I hear as much consensus around vice chair. So for that reason, we might want to do those one at a time.
Okay. Well, I'll entertain a motion for the chair. Brian?
I move to nominate Rick Weston as chair of the technical advisory group.
And I second that nomination.
Any discussion? No. Hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by raising their hands. Those opposed? The ayes have it. I guess I'm chair now. Okay, let's go to vice chair. I had said that both Emily and Sam had indicated I'll say a willingness to take on the role. I don't know how best to proceed in this one. We can flip a coin, or or should there be I really don't know how to proceed in this discussion at this point. But go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, sure. So, I had said that I'd be willing to do it if no one else wanted to. I'm similar to Emily. I'm concerned that it may be a bandwidth thing. So, Emily, I'd be happy to defer to you on this. if you want the role.
I'm just curious if there are any other TAG members that feel they have, a strong amount of bandwidth to do this justice. I do think I could do a good job. I have a lot of facilitation experience and experience with similar processes. I'm just worried about the time commitment, so I just wanted to invite if anyone else is interested in nominating that I don't may also be experiencing a failed retirement like Rick, or for other reasons has a little bit more bandwidth at this time. Just wanted to create some space for that. Don't all overwhelm me with your eagerness to respond.
Well, I would just say that I think the time commitment for the vice chair can be fairly constrained. Consulting with me on the agenda, and I'll be working, of course, will be working closely with Deirdre and Tom, who've done really just a wonderful job of helping me along in the last 2 weeks, and certainly beforehand. I will do my best to make sure the job is not does not create too much of an imposition on the vice chair's time. Brian.
I move to nominate Emily Levin to serve as vice chair of the Technical Advisory Group.
A second?
I second.
That was loose.
Yes.
Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of the motion signify by raising their hands. Those opposed? The ayes have it, and I saw that Sam raised his hand. Very good. So thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it very much. And thank you, Emily, very much.
Well,
and Brian,
thank you for your stipulations that you will seek to reduce the amount of effort for the vice chair, and I'll strive to do my best. For today, I want to note I'm going to probably have my camera off more than usual because I'm getting over a cold and I'm having to cough a lot. So I might not be as engaged as chair for today's meeting as I might like.
No problem. Thank you all. And thank you again, Sam, for your willingness and graciousness in this. Okay, item 5. I am turning to Tom and Deirdre and Brian, I guess, as well. There are several items, updates from the PUC and the administration generally. Thank you. Is it Tom or Deirdre?
Tom, you want to? Yeah, just.
I'll give a couple updates and welcome my PUC colleagues to fill in anything that I missed. I think the big thing that's happened in the last week or so is the annual fuel dealer registration. Few things moved on that part. The PUC has granted a grace period for folks to register. We heard feedback from fuel dealers that the couple of weeks from when the registration form went live to the statutory deadline was going to be insufficient for many folks, especially during the heating season, and that was great feedback. And so we granted a grace period to complete registrations until leap year day, February 29th. What else? The commission issued an order saying that it would hold as confidential certain of the information that is provided by fuel dealers. Internally, not ready for public consumption yet is a revised schedule in the DDA proceeding following discussion from the workshop last week on that topic. we had a robust dialogue at the workshop on default delivery agent obligations, responsibilities that's stemmed from written comments that had been filed, I think, 2 weeks ago. And, you know, this is kind of foreshadowing something that Ken brought up. We are working away on the two orders, not the two orders, the two reports that are due to the legislature in 13 days. Those are the things that are top of mind that has happened since your last meeting. And folks are willing to fill in the blanks if I've missed anything.
I think I have another one. We do have a public engagement consultant now, and we'll be meeting with them this afternoon.
Ken.
But what about the technical consultant?
Very close, Ken, is all I can say. As folks are probably aware, we have a new chair at the PUC, and as often happens when a state employee transfers from one agency to another, email and other technical functionality is slow to follow. So it's really an administrative matter for why that contract isn't signed. Could happen at any moment. We're all eagerly awaiting that to happen. We are as much as you.
And also the agenda talks about the PUC procedural schedule. So I'll put it in a specific question. The commission has circulated kind of a draft document and then a workbook. And I think we discussed this last time. Is that going to have to go to become formally approved, or will this be more of an evolving document that maybe we should revisit on a regular basis?
My best answer, it's both of those things, Ken. So my understanding is the intent is to formalize a comprehensive schedule that will put folks on notice about when we will be addressing different topics, when filings will be due, when we intend to hold workshops, things like that. But I think as the TAG does its work, as the Equity Advisory Group does its work, as we learn more, as we start to engage with the public engagement facilitator and our technical consultant, the schedule is going to change over time. But we want to try to do our best to enable folks to map out the process. So we've received comments on that draft schedule that was issued. It's still a work in progress in terms of getting it finalized.
That's the December 21st draft schedule, correct? The one that I've still been working from that.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
If it's okay, I'd like to add an observation to that. And it came up this week, as you folks may know, there's a piece of legislation drafted to delay the appointment of the default delivery agent. So that got me looking. And even if the default delivery agent is assigned on June 1st, there's still a sequence of activities that I don't think makes sense. And it's the topic of establishing the default delivery agent credit cost, which I think is going to be a real lightning rod of discussion. And that isn't, because of the way it's written for a 3-year period, 25, 26, 27, and it probably can't be done until, I would say, October 1st, because the way the legislation is written is that determination relies upon the department's capacity study. And I just follow through. So if let's say October 1st, which I think would be pretty aggressive, but if October 1st that default delivery agent credit cost is established, then the obligated parties get 120 days to essentially respond, but to provide their plans for meeting their credit requirements. And that takes us, I believe, to November, December, January, February of 2025. And then only after that does the default delivery agent modify their budget to do their work to meet the 2025 credit requirement. So I know this is quite a topic, and I don't want to squeeze it into the agenda now, but it is one of these topics I would like to include at our next meeting as to how that sequence of events can be not just accelerated, modified in such a way so that actually 2025 can be addressed before 2025, because again, in 2025, the legislature is going to be approving the rules. But if so many of the moving parts, the very significant moving parts related to the cost of a credit, aren't going to be able to happen until well into the legislative session at the earliest, that's going to be really problematic. So again, I'm asking that next meeting, we have this specific discussion, and I'll say it right now, I will provide my comments as to a possible path to allow for 2025 to happen, still consistent with the legislative language.
Are you suggesting, Ken, you'll provide like a process flow chart or something that, translating that really helpful Excel workbook into kind of a critical path?
That, as a starting point, yes, but then I say that it will need a modification. It'll need a modification in order to get 2025 to actually work, because also, this whole process is based upon establishing a market, and that market can't happen until prices are established. So yes, timeline in terms of what the legislation, timeline, yes, for the 3-year product, 25, 26, 27, and then a suggestion, which I'm sure will foster all sorts of discussion about how to make 25 happen in a fashion that the market is established in 25 or during the year 2025.
TJ, your microphone's still on? Do you have?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, maybe you could just hear that, but the process map sounds good. I think that kind of visual flow chart would be really helpful generally. I was thinking about, establishing a market in 2025, and I think that phrase was making my wheels turn, because there's really it's going to be hard to do because the legislature has to approve something in 2025. So like May is the earliest time and will we really have a market in 2025? I think is an open question. I think that should be a goal. I just I don't know, DDA in February, I don't know if that's the barrier, but as opposed to the market being established, the rule being promulgated, then the DDA being selected. But I'm going too far, because the process map, I think, is the first step, and then and I think that's a great idea, Ken, and I appreciate the offer, and we could talk about how that all fits together once we see it.
And also, this is also a topic. If others want to work on it during the time period between now and the next meeting, I'm very glad to work as a group on this. I think it's a fascinating topic, and yeah.
Well, given the discussion that we had earlier about subgroups and the submission of work to the group as a whole, as it stands right now, we would, whatever you do, Ken, on your own, for example, you would bring up during the next meeting. But we can right now we can decide to form a small working group on this very question and task it with putting together a process map of the sort that you've suggested, and have it sent out with the agenda for the next meeting in advance. I think we can make that request. Brian, do I have it correct? Given the way we discussed this earlier, I want to make sure I get the process right.
So I'm not the decider because as a
No,
group,
but
that certainly is in line with the way I had
Yeah.
described the way I'd like the group to operate.
I want to keep it along those lines. So, look, it seems to me like a good idea that we do some work in the interim, and that we have something to look at, and point of departure for discussion of this topic next week or the next meeting. First of all, do we agree that this is something that we ought to be talking about in the next meeting? So far in the conversation, it sounds like we do, but let's hear what other folks think. And in this case, I think I'll take silence as loose. Go ahead.
I agree. I think that would be really helpful to us. And I would also love to see, if we get to the agenda today of scheduling meetings, really having a nice understanding of how many meetings we need to have in order to accomplish some of the goals would be really helpful, right? To know, and making sure some of the workshops are all on there too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I was just going to weigh in and agree that having a process map would be very helpful. And I have I guess a question about, are we just to assume that I think we're still awaiting the final procedural schedule from the PUC, but in the event there's any input that TAG would like to provide into the PUC's sequencing of things, I think our window to do that is rapidly closing. Is that correct? So I just wanted to check in on whether we're also seeking to influence the regulatory timeline and sequence.
Tom's hand is up. So you were going to say something, and I'll let you respond to Emily as well. I'll ask you to, Tom.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, going back to Ken and TJ's comments. I think Ken began with a discussion of the default delivery agent timeline, and then TJ referred to the Excel workbook schedule. And just want to remind folks that the default delivery agent process is being investigated in case 23-2221, which has its own schedule, and then the Excel workbook is for the overall rulemaking. So those are different things. So I just wanted to remind folks of that. To Emily's question, the commission would absolutely welcome the TAG's feedback on either schedule. We've got it at the staff level. We've got a draft schedule ready to hand over to the commissioners imminently in the -2221 proceeding. We've had a schedule out there for a while, and we discussed the amendment of that schedule at last week's workshop, and we're presently on a very tight timeline to conclude all of that work in order to hit that June 1st deadline. In the dash rule case, right now the schedule's in draft form. We've received written comments. If the TAG wanted to provide its guidance on appropriate sequence of events, that would be very welcome. But again, I think the TAG would want to act expeditiously on that in providing that feedback.
Yeah, let me jump in. Luce, if I may just jump in real quickly. Your hand is up. Emily, others, I'm going to propose, and this is at the end of the agenda. I'm going to propose that for the next 2 months at least, we continue on an every 2-week schedule for meetings, and we can talk about which day. Thursdays might be best for the PUC, but let's have that discussion. In which case, in 2 weeks, we could at least get back to the PUC with our thoughts on the overall schedule and the DDA as well. If if we proceed in the fashion that we're now discussing. So that's a little bit of a teaser on where we might go with that. Any other thoughts? If not, TJ, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to offer, I don't know if this makes it easier or harder for the initial, but Ken, it might not be me actually, but we do have staff here that are participating in, listening into these conversations and working on the clean heat standard that we could help with that effort if it is helpful. I don't know if we need to assign that formally or we can just kind of do it informally. Seems ideal, but just wanted to put that on the table so everybody knew.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, TJ. Brian?
Yes, I care to make a motion, but I just want to make sure I'm moving for the product that Ken has offered and that PSD has offered to provide support for. So,
that'd be great.
based on what we heard from PUC staff about, welcoming comments on the schedule. So, and I will ask Ken, can you be specific about what it is you're offering so I can get that on the table properly?
Oh, you're muted, Ken.
Yeah, I think it's in two pieces. One is to lay out the timeline as I think the legislation suggests with the relationship of the formation of the DDA, establishing the default delivery agent credit, and that initiation of the market response, which is the response of the obligated entities to say, hey, we think we can do credits this way. And again, so that's part one. And I think from my perspective, the conclusion to part one is that it makes 2025 essentially impossible. And so the other part, which I really want to have a discussion, not today, because I think there is a path that doesn't necessarily affect the 2220 or 2221 current schedule, but adds a couple of pieces that I believe the legislation allows for and will allow for 2020 to the market to be initiated so that 2025 can happen. So yeah, two pieces.
So a motion for development of a timeline for formation of the DDA.
The DDA credit, the credit cost in particular. Because the DDA,
or a timeline for establishment or for establishment of the DDA credit costs.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Mr. Chair, I move that we assign Ken Jones with the assistance of the Public Service Department development of a timeline for establishment of the DDA credit cost for consideration at the next meeting.
Is there a second? I'm sorry, I didn't. Did someone second?
I'll second.
Oh, thank you, Liz. Is there any discussion? Well, let me just ask this question. If at all possible, for that work to be done and a short memo attached to the next agenda, would that be acceptable? If possible. If not, we just pick it up on the day of the next meeting. But would that be acceptable as well? Is that part of the thought here?
Yeah, my intention would be to get something to TJ and PSD on Monday or Tuesday, and then schedule a time to sit down with them and work on something so that by Monday or Tuesday of the next week, we could have a memo available.
Luce.
I did not get a notice of the workshop last week for DDA, and I don't know if we should as a group or not. Just bringing that up.
I think we certainly should. Um,
To
Tom.
quickly come, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my understanding is that all members of the technical advisory group are participants in EPUC in both cases. Uh, I, without looking at this, I can't say exactly when notice was issued by the clerk of the commission, but just please pay careful attention to what's coming out of EPUC. It's probably like a fire hose on some days, and apologies for that. But
Yeah.
that's where you would receive notice of those workshops and other opportunities.
Right.
I've
We've
been getting,
received emails in the past, so I didn't know if that was going to continue, or do we need to keep checking the web page? I guess that's my question.
well,
So,
probably
thank,
safe to do both. It's probably safe to do. I've been getting lots of notices. I try to
okay.
read them. I may have missed one or two. Um, uh, is it any more discussion on the motion? There is,
Did it get seconded?
yes, I believe Luce seconded it. If no more discussion, all in favor of the motion signify by raising their hands. Great. Those opposed? The ayes have it. It seems to me, this is the appropriate moment, and the agenda has it as such, the appropriate moment to talk about how a subgroup functions. And I had a chat with Tom and Deirdre yesterday about this. And there's recent case law that establishes that our subgroups must function effectively the way we do, which is to say, under the open meeting law. So we need to have a chat immediately about how Ken and the PSD staff get together to have this conversation. Okay, let me just finish my comment, then TJ, I'll turn to you. And Tom, Deirdre, if you have thoughts, please chime in. We will need, as a general matter for our subgroups, to have an open meeting, which means at the very least a place where people can come in or getting online with Zoom. So this is a logistical matter. I'll put it to the group. I don't have the answers exactly how that will work, but let's at least start the discussion. Let's see. We've got TJ first.
Yeah, well, I think we might need to just address this in a case by case basis. I wouldn't designate, the process we just talked about as a formal subgroup. I think it's more of, an individual member offering to do something and we offered to help. It's not creating a quorum of this committee or anywhere close. And it is, maybe it turns into something ongoing, but at least right now, I don't think it's like an ongoing effort. I would think like if there was something related to the subgroup related to characterizing the savings from a heat pump, and they're meeting several times because there's several issues for them to be the lead on, like that, maybe we start to talk about more formally establishing that group. But for something like this, it would really be an impediment to actually moving fast. And the result is going to be kind of a fresh thing for discussion at the next TAG meeting. So that's my recommendation for this one. Doesn't get to your broader process questions, but I just throw that out there.
Well, I hope what you suggest is what we can do, but I do want to turn it back to Deirdre and Tom to share with the group what they shared with me yesterday about this. Just what your understanding of the law is, and if we are in fact characterizing this as something else, do we have is there a way of going forward. I'm confessing to unsurety in this regard.
Deirdre, I'm going to look to you. Are you in a position to answer the question? Because I feel like I'm not the expert on this topic.
Yes, so we, at the request to provide more guidance on subcommittees for the group, we have a revised set of procedures that's going to go in front of the commission next week. And we consulted our general counsel at the commission, and it's essentially the intersection of public meeting or intersection of a public body and meeting, which is really substantive decision, that requires subcommittees, if there's a quorum of the subcommittee, that it is subject to all the rules of open meeting law. And without a quorum, you can't meet. So that's kind of where the recent case law also states the same. That's my understanding, and that's what our general counsel and deputy general counsel has consulted us to provide guidance on.
Thank you. Emily?
We've been talking this through. I'm a member of my town energy committee, and we've had similar discussions on a smaller scale around open meeting law. And my understanding is that a subgroup, whether formal or informal, cannot make decisions. But if it's a group of people less in number than a quorum, so below a quorum, they can work substantively to process materials and develop resources and recommendations that would then be brought back to the full group for decision making, and that development of kind of materials and processing doesn't constitute a meeting. So, I mean, I think what you said is correct if you're talking about a full meeting at which decisions are made. So, like, we can't have 3 people run off and make a bunch of decisions because that would turn it into a meeting and they don't have a quorum and so forth. But if they're just doing kind of interim work and refining ideas and processing things to bring back to the full group for more complete deliberation, I think that is allowable. That was our conclusion, was that was allowable at the East Montpelier Energy Committee, because otherwise it would be impossible for us to actually accomplish the updating of our town energy plan if we couldn't work together on any pieces of that.
Okay. There's a nuance here, it seems to me, is that Ken could possibly chat with public service department staff, who are not members of the committee, by the way, on the schedule. We're tasking only Ken, the only member of the TAG, to provide what looks to be a schedule that we can discuss. That seems to me not to be a subgroup. TJ?
Yeah, I just want to 100% agree with that. The caveat that the staff is, under my direction on this subject. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but, just practically speaking, there's several entities here that I talk with in the course of my job on a regular basis. And, we can't have every conversation there that might touch on like the impacts of the clean heat standard credit development on a utility's IRP, for instance, or something like that, like a credit allocation, that they all can't be like noticed public meetings, and it's just not feasible. So I think we could take cues from the Climate Council and how they operate, and where there are people kind of, a couple, 3, even 4 members going to work together no decisions made, and then put something forward. I don't know any other way to operate. And I think that there's different ways to interpret the rules, and I think we should not interpret them in a way that makes the work of this committee impossible.
Thank you, TJ. Okay. Well, Brian, with all that in mind, is there a motion that you think you can make? Or did we already make one?
I believe there's a motion on the table.
Yes, that's right. There is a motion on the table.
The motion passed at 11:01.
Yes, right. Forgive me. Sorry. Okay. Yes, forgive me on that. Yes, it's passed, and so we we made a decision. We've tasked Ken to put together the schedule that he has suggested, and he can seek the assistance of PSD staff. I think that I'll leave it at that and move on. Okay. Then next on the agenda is a discussion about emissions accounting. First of all, it's 11:11. We're only slightly behind the schedule that I set out, I think. So I think we're good. Ken, I've asked you to lead the discussion. But before I do, I see that Brian's got his hand up.
Yes, hold on just a second here. I thought there was something
Did I miss something?
that I was going to talk about. Yes, item B.
Oh, yes. Yes. Forgive me. Yes, facilitation.
Yes. And
Thank you. Thank you very much.
well, no apologies yesterday. It's necessary. So I have what I believe to be good news for the group, and particularly for our newly minted chair and vice chair. Some may know, but others may not know that Vermont is a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance. So it's a group of states across the nation that it's a nonprofit that it's made up of representatives from governor's offices from across the nation that are interested in advancing climate initiatives, much of the way that we are doing as well. And the U.S. Climate Alliance provides technical support and funding for states that are working on these issues. So the Climate Action Office contacted the Climate Alliance folks to discuss the facilitation request that we had, and to see if there was a way that they could support that. And the answer was yes, there actually is a mechanism by which the U.S. Climate Alliance could provide funding for a facilitator for this group, as requested by this group, potentially for facilitation for the Equity Advisory Group. We're trying to see that can be funded. And also they are able to be the contracting entity and to contract directly with a facilitation contractor, which would alleviate the timeliness issue that I know we had come up when we were discussing it the last time. If the PUC is required to go through the state contracting process to engage a facilitator. The relationship between the USCA and PUC is like the PUC would still act as not as the contract. They're not the contracting party, but they would be a contracting overseer. So they would be managing the contractor, ensuring that they were performing the work as scoped out, and then as invoices were submitted, the PUC would review them and then would direct the USCA to provide payment. So this is all very good news. We've had this conversation with PUC staff, and they are very open to this. We've also contacted the facilitator, Consensus Building Institute. That is the facilitator for the Climate Council. They have indicated they do have capacity to be able to provide facilitation services to this group. and they are looking into whether or not they could also do the same for the Equity Advisory Group. So that's my update. We will be meeting with PUC staff. I think we're meeting with you again next week and we also are going to introduce them to the facilitator that's off from CBI that is available to provide the service. And I don't think there's any action that's required from the group at this time, so it's just an update. But happy to field any questions or comments.
Well, thank you, Brian. That sounds terrific. Emily?
Yeah, that's great news. I was just curious if the conversations with CBI, or I'm not as familiar with the work that they've done on the Climate Council, can you just say a couple words about the extent of the facilitation support they would be providing? Like, presumably they could facilitate our actual meetings. Not that Rick isn't doing an able job with that, but that piece, but in particular, kind of the logistics support and sort of sequencing and planning and just sort of coordinating the work. Do they get involved with that as well?
They certainly have capacity, to facilitate to meetings, to assist with agenda preparation. I think it would be what roles the facilitator is going to serve versus how the chair and the vice chair, what they're going to be doing versus what the things, such as preparing meeting notes and the recording the meetings that the PUC staff is doing would all get worked out. But I think that, general capacity to be able to do what we asked for, like is, making sure that there's like a neutral third party not on the tag that's facilitating the meetings, and then making sure that the agendas are prepared in advance and circulated, and again, just to make things run as smoothly as possible.
Deirdre?
Yeah, so I just wanted to communicate from the PUC side that we're supportive of whatever the group wants to do. So our hope was that TAG collectively could weigh in on this opportunity at this meeting, so we can decide how to move forward.
Thank you. It seemed to me that would be a good idea as well. In the earlier discussions in the previous two meetings, there's been a general sense that the group wanted facilitation, would prefer it. Would it make sense? It seems to me it would make sense, but I'm going to take your temperature here. Would it make sense for us to, I don't know, move or resolve to support this action? Dominic, is there a way we should do this? Others' thoughts on this?
Just from the parliamentary perspective, the easiest way would be a very quick resolution of saying that the TAG is interested and would like the PUC, ANR, to pursue this with the U.S. Climate Alliance. If there are any specific requests or stipulations that would go along with that, I think now would be a good time to discuss those.
Thank you. That sounds like a motion for a resolution, almost there. How do the folks feel? Would anyone like to make such a motion? Is that what we would move to resolve? Is that, or do we simply resolve? We move to resolve. Okay.
I can do it if I brought the offer, but I can do it if no one else is going to. So I will move that the TAG direct PC and ANR to continue with discussions with the U.S. Climate Alliance with the goal of engaging a facilitator for this group.
And I will second that, Ken.
Any discussion? Sam?
Thanks, Rick. One question that I had, I guess, just for clarification, would the U.S. Climate Alliance be providing the like technical modeling and sort of like strategy development behind this, or would that be then another third party consultant? And the reason I ask is just that I've never heard of, like, usually it's someone, you know, Energy Futures Initiative, I think, is one of the Vermont based groups, or ICF or someone along those lines that does the actual modeling. And just curious how that would work.
The modeling is separate. Um,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to speak about the facilitation services. So what the USCA is willing to fund is facilitation services for this group and potentially for the equity advisory group. I'll let the PUC staff talk about the technical contract, which Tom mentioned before. That is pending signature. That would
Okay.
that would undertake that activity that you're talking about, Sam.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Tom, any additional clarification on that? Go ahead.
Yes, so the technical consultant that we hope to have engaged any minute now or any hour now, their scope of work is, clean heat measure characterization and the development of a technical reference manual for the Clean Heat Standard program. So it's not facilitation services. We do expect them to regularly attend TAG meetings and
Right.
consult with the TAG often, but not facilitate group meetings. As to the motion, we are happy to continue to work with ANR to, work with the Climate Alliance if that's the TAG's wish. I just, would like some clarification. Is the TAG asking us to select and vet a contractor, or is the TAG okay with the contractor that Brian has already referenced? Because those are two different things. We are officially neutral on this. We are trying to be assistants to the TAG, and if this is the way that the TAG would like to proceed, we're happy to continue to provide that assistance and do what we need to do to accomplish a facilitator for the group.
Thanks, Tom. Any thoughts from TAG members about that? The way this is proceeding, it would proceed, is that there is a contractor and there's funding for that there may be funding for that contractor, and that it would be in effect a fait accompli. Do we want to support that? The motion asks us to resolve to support that effort.
Are we looking
Now,
for a second, or I'm sorry, where are we in the discussion? I support this effort to engage
This
with this group.
is just for procedure update. We are currently under debate on the motion that the TAG direct the PUC and ANR to continue with discussions in the Climate Alliance to engage a facilitator for TAG. It has been seconded.
TJ.
Just a timing question. Apologies if you said this, Brian, but would it be a new contract with CBI, or could they start working effectively, basically immediately? If we have to go through a process that could be like 3 months, 4 months, when a whole lot of the work and decisions need to be made by this group. And so I just wanted to get a sense of that.
Right. So the process would be, it would be a new contract, but USCA will contract directly with CBI. So we'd be not going through the state procurement process. USCA it would be the contracting entity, but as I said, the PUC would act as the contract supervisor.
So it could happen rather quickly.
That's what they tell us. It could be very quick.
Okay, that is helpful. If it was a long one, I would have said it's not worth it, but
no, that's one of it has a lot of these features that we need, which is an identified contractor and an ability to contract on a schedule that aligns with what we're doing versus the, the months long state procurement process that we're all familiar with, all too familiar with.
Right. Dominic, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, TJ. Are you good?
Well, I was just going to give a thought just for folks that don't know CBI. I think they do a pretty good job facilitating at the Climate Council. CBI stands for Consensus Building Institute. So they do whatever they can to build consensus. And that sometimes is at tension with needing to move quickly and make decisions. And so I think that the management of the group, and that might put a little bit on you, Rick, and Emily to just make sure that we're getting decisions when we need them.
Right.
But I just wanted to, overall though, I think they do a pretty good job of drawing opinions from people that, aren't blabbering all the time like I do. So.
I would just remind folks that consensus is not a synonym for unanimity. But yes.
Right.
Yes.
And yes, I think TJ makes an important observation that particularly at the Climate Council, early in their process decided that what they were going to do was to seek consensus as possible and then to go to a vote. They do not operate by, Robert's Rules of Order. The CBI facilitators, the one that would be working with us is Catherine Morris. They're very skilled and have experience in a number of venues. We get to direct how it is we want the meeting to be run. Right now, we're working under Robert's rules. I think that's going okay. We could continue to do this. We could change our mode of operation to be more of a consensus-based type of decision process. The facilitator will work with whatever structure we decide that we want to work under.
Okay.
I think this is a great idea if it takes off administrative duties and we can focus more on the tasks. But do we still have a quorum with Michelle dropping off? Can you just confirm that, please?
I believe the answer is yes. By my count, yes. Okay, well then, let's see, Moose, your hand is still up. Tom, your hand is up.
Just want to clarify that the motion on the table was for the ANR and PUC to continue investigating a contract with the Climate Alliance. And it sounds like people are getting pretty specific about a contract with this individual contractor. And just want to make, I, on behalf of the PUC, am looking for specific guidance from the TAG, not just the possibility of a contract, but that, is the TAG asking us to engage in contracting with CBI? That'd be helpful.
Seems like that's a request for a friendly amendment to the motion to specify CBI in it. Is that correct? And can we do that?
You could have a friendly amendment if, let me check. Brian would accept it. It could not come from Tom as he is not a member of the group.
That's correct. So someone else would need to make it.
Yes, if the group would like to specify that the requested contractor is CBI, if that itself may be contentious, then it could be motion to be amendment, and then we could vote on that and then vote on the initial motion.
I would motion that we amend the motion to make this a specific contract with CBI building on the successful climate commission work.
Second?
I think what's more important is for Brian to accept it as a friendly amendment. So that
Okay,
it doesn't, so that we don't have to vote on the amendment and then vote on the initial.
okay,
Yes, I accept. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Emily.
That
Yeah,
makes,
and I,
thank you. Forgive me
yeah.
for not having these.
Correct. Emily, are you interested in withdrawing your motion withdrawing your formal motion to amend, or would you like to keep that motion to amend so we can debate the specifying CBI?
I don't know if, and does anyone want to debate it? Is raise your hand if you think this is worthy of debate. Otherwise, I'll withdraw and we could just proceed to a vote, I guess, on the amended.
It looks like folks are not interested in debating it. So that would mean you could withdraw it if you wish.
Okay, I withdraw my motion.
Okay, so Emily's motion has been withdrawn. The question on the table is the motion on the table is to resolve that the tag direct PUC and A&R to continue discussion of the U.S. Climate Alliance to engage a facilitator, specifically the Consensus Building Institute.
And do we need a second for that now?
No, we do not need
No.
a second. We can proceed directly to a vote on.
Okay, all in favor of the motion, signify by raising your hands. Let's see, all those opposed, signify by raising your hands. Okay, seeing no opposed, the motion passes. Thank you, Brian. If there's anything I can do to help that process, let me know.
I shall. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I will report back to the tag. I'll be working with PUC, and if we can provide an interim update before the next meeting, we shall certainly do so.
Great, thank you. Okay, it's 11:32. We've got two 30-minute discussions, and I'm going to try to hold them to 30 minutes. Still ahead of us, and then a few matters just to finish up with. Okay, Jared has to leave. Oh, I'm sorry to hear. An unhappy child, not well. Okay, we can do the count when everybody comes back, but I think a very short 5-minute break, barely 5 minutes, would be great for everyone. We come back here at 11, by my clock, 11:37. Turn on your screen when you come back, so we know everybody's back. 5 minutes. Thanks. Hit the wrong button, Emily. Hi, Deirdre. If you do a count of the members who come back, make sure we have 8 at least. There's some who've been on who've kept their cameras off, I've noticed.
Yeah, so I'm back. I'm gonna eat for a minute here, so I'm gonna go off camera. But I'm here.
Yep.
It's hard to vote if they have their camera off unless they're sending you another way. So
No, yeah, it's hard to vote, right? So that's correct. I treat them as abstentions.
I think we've got 8.
Hi, Matt. Matt, we saw you were here. Now, Jared, did you say you were taking off?
Around 12:20, I need to take off.
Okay, well, we'll be I hope, far along and in good shape by then. Okay, you know what, we got a group. We're back. This is good. Let's begin again, and thank you for your patience with me and this whole process. This is great. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to turn the discussion over to Ken to lay out some issues on emissions accounting. We want to identify our role, what the issues are, timeline for some deliverables. I mean, what would be nice to come out of this discussion, if you can, is an idea of what we want to do and whether and action steps. You know, do we task a subgroup to do something? Do we make a decision about something? Are there things we want to say? I'd like to have that conversation for the next 30 minutes. But I also, before we take any action, I want to open up for public comment before we, as I say, before we make a decision. So we'll set aside some time for that as well. So Ken, I turn to you.
Yeah, so in terms of the tags role, we had this discussion last meeting about the difference between accounting for carbon dioxide emission reductions using the inventory methodology and using a life cycle analysis inventory. And one of the Emilys, and I apologize, I don't know which one, kind of raised the sort of verbal explanation of, yeah, you have to do the math twice. essentially is what I heard. So what I intended to do here is to lay it out a little more formally, especially the first half of the assignment, for what the math is in relation to carbon dioxide emission reductions associated with the combustion of different fuels, the use of different fuels, and feed into how it might work out in terms of our long-term goal of actually establishing specific targets for each year's carbon dioxide equivalent emission reductions and the relationship to the implementation of clean heat measures. So that was my intent. Is this little 2-page thing is to help structure that, and so I'll dive into it. And what the kind of the first half, and I think it's fairly straightforward, is to look at each of the fuels of interest. And I include a little table there, and we can expand on that list if necessary, or maybe contract it a little bit with regards to the woods if possible, if that's useful. But for each fuel, we know what the inventory, Colin Smythe can provide us this very specific numbers about how the inventory assesses the combustion of those fuels on either a physical basis or on a per million BTU basis. So those numbers probably exist. And then when we get the product from ANR, in the next few months about life cycle analysis, it may be close, it may be exact, or it may be close to what we need for the life cycle analysis based CO2 emission. And it will probably be a little bit of a different number. And so by filling out that table, we'll have a part of what we need in order to move forward. The next part is the bolus of the work of our technical consultant is to characterize each of the clean heat measures. And in doing that, there will be a determination, an estimation, on some approach to saying how much does each clean heat measure reduce the use of a fossil fuel, and in the case of electrification, increase the use of electricity, or increase the use of either a solid biofuel, woody biomass, or a liquid biofuel, renewable biodiesel or fuel oil. And from that, you then go back to this initial table and use these numbers to come up with both answers. Okay, the one answer, which is establishing a credit value, because my understanding of the legislation is our credit values are to be based on the annual reduction in CO2 equivalent as measured by life cycle analysis. So we'll get that, but then using the other factors, say, okay, if we have a certain mix of those measures, how will it get us to the overall reduction that we're aiming towards in terms of having the clean heat standard approach get us towards meeting the Global Warming Solutions Act reduction, which is measured as the inventory-based approach. So that was my intent. So you have that page and a half, and I guess I could kind of put it in the kind of in form of questions. Is my statement that we believe that the clean heat credits are going to be defined as annual reduction in carbon dioxide equivalents as measured by as life cycle analysis? Is that everyone's understanding?
Brian just put the text of the legislation in the chat box. I'll start by saying it's my understanding, yes, but
yeah. Then my other question is my explanation that first coming up with this table on a fuel specific, the difference in a fuel specific basis of between the life cycle analysis estimation and the inventory, is that does that work for you? Do you think that is also a useful step to get to the ultimate goal, which is the life cycle credit determination?
Emily?
I have a clarifying question about the table. Are these all supposed to be annual? Like I've lost track of the time scale. I see that there's the life cycle and inventory based emissions on both a per BTU and a per physical unit basis, but there's
Excuse me.
kind of a major lifetime issue and a conversion from the full life cycle impact to the annual impact, right? So is that also embedded in the table?
Yeah, that's a good question from my perspective. I was assuming that the life cycle number is not annual. It is a specific number that we're going to need in order to define a credit. So, and the credits are annual, granted, but every credit is the result of an action that reduces the use of fossil fuel, and it's the reduction in the use of that fossil fuel on either a physical unit or a million BTU basis that gives us a number. And so the annual part is another part of the credit determination, and that's every year the credit calculation is made. But anyway, did that clarify your thinking or did it muck it up?
I'm just looking at the language that Brian pasted in, and that the annual value, et cetera, equal to the life cycle CO2 emissions of the fuel use that is avoided in a given year. So, how do you? I understand that the credit is annual, but you certainly aren't going to give a full annual credit. Like you're not going to be able to count 15 years of savings every single year. So I don't know. I'm curious what other people think about that.
Well, I'll jump in, and this is as ignorant a statement as can possibly be made. In thinking it through, I thought it seemed to me that, well, what's implied by this table, but not here, is a fourth or fifth or sixth or fifth and sixth columns that create ratios. What emerges from it is, again, a ratio that expresses the difference between the numbers. And it's from that credit values are derived, or I guess we characterize measures, but ultimately they're divided by the number of years, right? Ultimately the credits are, as you say, annual. And so there's got to be some math that takes the life cycle, the full lifetime emissions reductions and turns them into annual. But again, this is just me thinking it through. And if I'm off, by all means, please tell me. Let's see. TJ's. Well, let me go. I'm going to go to Floyd first. Floyd, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. First of all, thanks, Ken, for putting this together. This is really helpful to, help kind of with the thinking process here. It seems to me that we need two of these types of tables, one for fuels and one for measures, because the way the language is structured, it kind of separates the two. And I think that would be helpful for, just keeping it clearer and separating out and then adding them up at the end in terms of overall credit. So I'll throw that out there. I think
I agree entirely. As I said, this is half of it. The second half is going to come when we do the clean heat measure characterization. It's going to be that, because one of the challenges there is, let's use a heat pump as an example. A heat pump can reduce fuel oil consumption. An individual heat pump can reduce fuel oil, can reduce propane, can reduce natural gas. And my understanding, and TJ, you can jump in terms of tier 3, you'd essentially use a blend to say a generic heat pump reduces the blend of fuels, and then you'd have to use that blend for each of the life cycle versus inventory numbers to say, okay, that measure will accomplish, again, a much more complicatedly derived, but still easy when you have a computer to determine a specific number on both a life cycle and inventory base. But you're right, this is only the first half. There is another table,
Okay, good.
which is measure specific.
And I think that would be helpful, I forget who asked the question, whether this is annual or not. Since this is fuels, these life cycle emissions would have the carbon intensity built into the calculation. And then since it's an intensity, you would just be multiplying it by the volume of energy units you're talking about, right? Over a year, and then you can calculate the credits that way. So I think we have a solution there. We just need to kind of think it through. The other thing I would suggest is that we add, renewable diesel 100% from waste and renewable diesel 100% from seed oils. I know biodiesel from those two categories are added at the end there, but I would suggest adding renewable diesel as well, since that is a growing sector that we're seeing, and they are very closely related but chemically different substitutes for fossil diesel that could be easily used in this application.
TJ? Thanks, Floyd. TJ? And then we'll go to Sam.
Yeah, I guess I want first, thanks, Ken. Again, useful. I think it is, I'll just agree with folks in multiple steps, although I think there's 3 steps that you identified, Ken, in your memo. The first is the table, which is fuels, and getting the numbers for fuels. I think when we get into the details of it, I think that we need to better specify what those fuels are. Like, I think there should be one for electricity and maybe several for RNG, depending on the feedstock, for example. But that aside, so there's the one table for fuels, then there's the measure characterization that you both talked about. And then the third step is we need to look at those, and then I'm not positive it's a responsibility of the TAG, but the TAG at least is consulted, and we need to choose a measure mix. And this is what we brought up last time and where the challenge lies. So you can't, Rick, you mentioned ratios and assigning ratios, but in order to get to the obligations, I think we need to choose a measure mix, which is going to be really subjective, and the only thing we know about it is it's going to be wrong, whatever we do, right? And that's going to be probably the most challenging piece of it. There's a lot of technical work for the measure mix. We have the PUC technical consultant. The potential study that the department is doing is going to kind of have measure characterizations necessarily in it. But choosing that measure mix is kind of the third step that in where we get to assigning the obligation. And you called it out in your memo, but to figuring out how to translate. We have these life cycle credits. We know what their value is towards the inventory, and we need the obligation to add up to, by 2030, enough reductions to meet the inventory. Let's choose this measure mix. That means you need this many clean heat credits in order to comply. And so that last bit, I think, is the hardest one. And I actually am unsure who is the leader on that, if it's the TAG brings something forward or if the TAG is reacting to something on choosing the measure mix.
Before I turn to Sam, if you would indulge me just for a moment, I certainly hope the work that the department does and the technical consultant can inform or even drive that discussion, TJ. But let me just ask one question. When you say measure mix, I just want to make sure I understand. Measure mix, sort of, it's a global measure mix, or is it a sort of by installation measure mix? I'm not sure I fully understand.
Yeah, well, I think of it as just the globally, like the mix of measures that will be installed by
Okay.
all obligated
Right.
entities to
Okay.
meet the target or meet the
Okay.
overall obligation. And that
Gotcha.
yeah, and the reason that gets challenging is as soon as we assign that, then rightly so, I think obligated entities then go and try and, you know, they're going to do the most efficient thing for them. And maybe that's, we try and predict that, but we don't want to force it and do something regulatorily that causes an inefficient outcome.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, Sam. Please.
Thanks, Rick. First, just maybe a basic edit for me. I think next time for the next version of the table here, similar to Floyd and TJ's comments, would be good to see just the different RNG feedstocks broken out there, of which there are four. So landfill gas, wastewater, ag waste, and diverted food waste. And we can get into conversations about that later. It occurs to me that maybe the biggest immediate issue that we'll face with sort of matching the resources to the state's target is how the upstream portion of life cycle emissions for each resource end up fitting into that, right? So in other words, if you have, let's say you're importing a biofuel that has production emissions that occur out of state, and maybe you're also replacing natural gas, which has production emissions that occur out of state. How do those life cycle emissions then translate into what the state considers to be within the boundaries of its own inventory, so to speak? So just flagging that. I mean, maybe it'll be helpful to know, I guess, who's working on that question, if we're working on that question, or if we're working on that question, and someone else is also working on that question, and then we're ultimately going to discuss that, or if anyone has thoughts on that topic.
Any thoughts? Additional thoughts? I suspect, Sam, that there'll be, certainly the technical consultant and the department's consultant will be working on those questions, and there'll be input from soon to be obligated parties or already obligated parties and others in the rulemaking. So I'm guessing that there'll be a number of opportunities or to react to what folks think on these issues. Okay, any other thoughts on this? Oh, Luce, please.
Yes, and I'm new at all this, and I apologize, but on the inventory, is it a consumption-based inventory, or really kind of related to what Sam's saying? How is that inventory calculated? Is it transportation, everything, or is it just? Could someone define that to me a little bit better?
Brian?
Yeah, sure. So it's an in-state, basically consumption-based inventory, except for electricity. So, using transportation and heating as the two example sectors, it's the combustion emissions, the CO2 greenhouse emissions from the combustion of fossil fuels within the state boundaries. And but electricity is different. We calculate it based upon the contracted renewable energy credit corrected mix of electricity for the entire state. So it's highly renewable, but there's some portion of electricity emissions that comes from the system mix that is that it's emitting. So to Sam's point, right now, the inventory does not count emissions that occur outside of the state, except for in the electricity sector.
And how does transportation work into that, or does it not? If we're bringing in natural gas from far away, or, how does any of that count?
Well, for natural gas, that's it's the emissions from the combustion of natural gas.
And that's it, right?
Basically, get sold by DGS. They're the only supplier.
Supplier, right? But fuel oil, you're transporting it over roads. That's not counted, right? It's just the actual fuel you're using.
It's the emissions from the combustion of the fuel in the appliance. So it's based the transportation emissions are based on the sales numbers of transportation fuel in Vermont that we get from the tax department. Used to be different, but now it's based on that. So that's all the fuel that's sold. Some of that fuel gets combusted elsewhere. Tourists come in, they buy gasoline, do it someplace else. But that's the number that we use because we feel it's the best number that we have. Similar, like all the fuel oil that comes in, that's based on sales numbers that are reported to the tax department, and we can make an estimate. That fuel gets combusted, but we're not counting the transportation emissions, if there are any, would be from any diesel fuel that's sold in the trucks that are in Vermont for the trucks that are delivering it. But that's not really a life cycle number.
Okay.
So if your heating fuel supplier is from New Hampshire, for example, and they buy their gasoline, their diesel fuel for their truck in New Hampshire, that wouldn't show up in the inventory.
Okay, thank you.
Right, got it. Other thoughts? Ken, let me just ask you, do you have any suggestions about the next steps we should take in this matter at this time? And then I want to open it up to public comment.
I certainly can expand the memo to include what people suggested, both in terms of the fuel table, but then also the additional two tables, the looking at individual measures and a table that would say, okay, how many measures do you need? Just to provide a visual. But then I think as this proceeding progresses, we'll see where this gets applied. Again, when it gets to I think the huge one is the characterization of clean heat measures. Hopefully this informs that characterization process, because as we talk about, a heat pump can replace natural gas, fuel oil, propane, can replace wood. And so the characterization is going to need to be specific about that in order to assign specific reductions. So again, that's kind of a known. We know the characterization is going to include that, but hopefully this provides a very specific place to put information, so that we can then make this adjustment to the difference between the life cycle analysis based emission and the inventory emission.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Emily, but before I do, so you're suggesting that we use the memo essentially, as you say, to inform our thinking as a sort of a heuristic device as we move through this process.
That's the hope.
Great. Okay, Emily, then Brian, then Floyd, and then TJ.
Yeah, that was sort of my question. I still haven't been totally clear how this will be used, and I'm still sort of trying to come up to speed on all of our deliverables and responsibilities. And I know we talked about the procedural schedule. Can you just, I'm sorry if I missed something earlier in the meeting, but can you just talk about, I know that when we were talking about sequencing, there was a task that was identified to clarify the DDA timeline and sort of how our recommendations around that. But on the overarching timeline, can you just clarify for me, is there a task that somebody is doing to kind of overlay our responsibilities with the larger timeline and sort of help us understand how all the puzzle pieces fit together? Is that an ongoing?
Well, most immediately, I think it's the work that we've asked Ken to do in that previous motion. will help us in that regard.
I just wasn't clear if that was only with respect to the DDA, because I think we need.
I believe it's both, but
Yeah, the DDA is an integral part of the overall analysis. You know, the DDA is going to be kind of a player in the market, and it's going to be the market that's going to establish credit values, and the determination, as TJ brought out, of the mix, of the measure mix. So yeah, it is my intent, and it'll be a first product 2 weeks from now, but my intent to lay out how the retirement schedule fits in that. And yes, the back and forth, the iterative process between the obligated parties signing up for taking on a portion of the direct delivery of clean heat measures and the DDA. Again, I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to start allocating that, but that allocation is going to have to happen. And we got to have to understand about when are we going to start getting information that determines that. So yeah, I'm hoping that the next product gets us down that path, but it will not be comprehensive and complete. Not in the next 2 weeks.
thanks, Ken.
Yeah,
Brian?
and I'm sorry if I'm. Oh, I would
Go
just to
ahead,
follow
Emily.
up on that, taking us kind of backwards a little bit, but it's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around these individual issues without having that broader context. And I have seen the various timelines that the PUC is proposing, but I think just sort of making sure we're all clear on the process so that it's sort of like, um, the issue is defined for us. We understand when the PUC is going to be taking up that issue. We have a summary of the public comments related to that issue, and then those are sort of synthesized, and then we're weighing in at the appropriate time. Like, this is just one example, but I'm still remaining a bit unclear and hoping that some of the work that we'll be able to lay out over the coming weeks will kind of make that sequencing and process a little bit more clear.
Well, I agree, Emily, and I think we're all struggling with that, and that's exactly, I think, the purpose here. But yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I have like a technical question, but I do want to check with the chair on the time.
Well, we're running up against it, but ask the question, and then we'll go to Floyd, and we've got TJ, and then Emily. So I don't want to cut anybody off yet.
But I want to make sure everybody gets to answer their question, so we can probably resolve this online. I'm just trying to. My understanding of the clean heat credits, and they're in the chat for measures. It's the difference between the fuel use that's avoided minus the fuel that's used in any year. So for a clean heat measure, for example, weatherization, there's no emissions calculation for the weatherization project itself. It's just the fuel use avoided is like the fuel that you didn't burn because your building envelope is tighter minus the fuel that you burned. And that would be the credit that you get in that year, in year one for that weatherization project, and then you extend that out for 10 years. So I think it's all about like having a separate table for measures is still all about the fuels that are not being used. So I'm trying to figure out like why you would need a separate table, or how a separate table for measures is going to be different than the fuel ones. And there was just one more thing. I'll leave it at that. I think I think at least from the definition in the statute that the calculation of the credits is clear. Oh yes, and the other thing is like we are going to know, the credit earning entities are going to know when they go into a house what fuel is being used when they install a clean heat measure, whether it be a heat pump or a weatherization project. So we don't have to make an assumption. They'll register the credit and says, yeah, we installed this heat pump in a house that is burning propane. Or we did a weatherization project on a house that's fueled with fuel oil. So we're going to have that. I understand that to register the credits, we'll have the level of detail. So we won't have to make an assumption about what are the actual mix of fuels that are being replaced.
Okay, we'll come back. Well, I think TJ will have something to respond on that. But that makes good point. Floyd, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. So that kind of prediction of what's going to happen, I think, is part of my concern. I heard earlier use of the term ratio or mix. I mean, it sounds to me like, yeah, I think Rick mentioned the ratio. That sounded to me like a single value that would be used for these tables. My concern there, a couple of concerns there is, if you make assumptions and you come up with single values for each of the tables, that then becomes kind of a self-fulfilling sort of signal to the market that is what the state is looking for as opposed to anticipating, and then it no longer becomes a market-based program. So that would be a concern. I don't know how to address that. Perhaps some ranges are appropriate that would encompass reasonable assumptions. I guess I'm just flagging the concerns regarding, making certain assumptions that result in single values that then have consequences down the road. The other, I don't know if we're there yet on the agenda, but for this, because the language in the statute is clearly references argon grete, I would bring that up as the basis for doing these life cycles. I mean, it's the kind of the gold standard everyone's using out there, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. So I've put in a plug for grete, and we do have Michael Wong on the tag, and he is the creator of grete, so he's definitely the expert on that.
Unfortunately, Michael has resigned from the tag. We'll come back to that.
No.
Yes.
All right.
He just didn't have the bandwidth, but right you are. TJ, then Emily. You're muted, TJ.
Thank you. I agree with the impact on the market that Floyd, you were just talking about, having a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy there with, selecting a measure mix. I have like some suggestions for process going forward on each of those three. So maybe I'll let Emily go and then I could come back to that.
My comments were about overall process as well. So feel free to jump in and I can follow up.
Okay. Thank you. I was going to suggest one that we, if we try and update that table, Ken's table, the left-hand column with the different fuels, because that's a fuels column. They're all emissions factors. And so the inventory should be pretty easy. And I'll let Brian correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like Ken said, those are emissions factors that are in the inventory. The life cycle, starting place maybe is grete, but I don't know. I know there's some concerns about grete, so maybe that's just a starting point, but I don't want to, I guess I don't know enough about that, honestly, to say. So there's the table and filling out those emissions factors. Second step is measure characterization. And I wanted to point out that, we have two technical consultants doing overlapping things. And so the department has a potential study, and we were able to do a kind of, if folks are interested, higher level modeling assumptions and methods on kind of the measure characterizations. This would probably not be the fuels portion of it if we were going to do it soon. That could be later on, but actually implemented measures and some high level thoughts from our consultant, who is formerly Optimal Energy from Heinsberg, but now do business as NV5 were bought, I think, recently. So if, as the chair and vice chair think about an agenda going forward, I don't know when we're meeting next. I was assuming February 16th on the same path. I know they're available that day, but we could find out other days. And then, and that really leads to, I think, longer term is discussion on how we actually assign the obligations and create that obligation. And again, whether that's the TAG's job or just TAG reacting to that obligation, I think we need to decide that. So that's it for my process suggestions.
Great, thanks. Emily, do you want to jump back in?
Yeah. So going back to Emily's point and adding on to TJ's point about process, just wanted to share that Efficiency Vermont supports that sentiment, that from our perspective, the TAG should recommend the order and pace of the technical work being done, and then could serve as a review board for the technical topics that are presented before us, to limit the new work that's being produced by the group.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're as usual taking more time, and that's fine. This is great. I'd like to open it up to comment from the public, who are any members of the public who have attended or attending the meeting. I ask that you confine your comments to 2 minutes each, and we'll go from there. One raised hand, two raised hands so far. Hang on, mine are not coming up. Pike Porter.
Hi, I'm Pike Porter. I'm a member of the Equity Advisory Group, although I'm not speaking on behalf of the group today, but rather speaking personally. I'm going to put in the chat, I put in earlier, but I'm going to put it in again, the link to the EPA emissions factors, which might be a good place for the TAG to start. And I want to point out specifically the emission factors for wood and wood residuals, which is 93.8 kilograms per million BTUs. And I'm pointing that out because GREET was mentioned. GREET specifically excludes the carbon from wood combustion. So it is not a good modeling system for district energy, for example, or advanced wood heating systems, or anything else that uses wood. That is based on policy, federal policy decisions. And I will, through the PUC, Dominic, I will send a little synopsis of the policy history. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pike. Nick Presampieri, I hope I pronounced it correctly, or got close at least.
That was perfect. Almost no one gets my name right. I'm really impressed.
Thank you.
Just a couple of brief comments. I'm an interested resident of Burlington. I was confused by the discussion of whether or not to count out-of-state emissions. I think that was made in reference to the inventory. I note that 10 VSA section 578 says Vermont shall reduce emissions of greenhouse gases from within the geographic boundaries of the state and those emissions outside the boundaries of the state that are caused by the use of energy in Vermont. So I would think that if you were getting, for example, RNG from out of state for use in Vermont, that you would have to take into account the out of state emissions. I agree with what Mr. Porter just said about the GREET model. It's not appropriate because it doesn't count biogenic emissions. And I'm also very concerned because there's a statute that requires ANR to do a rulemaking outlining how it's going to develop the inventory, and that's never been done. I don't know if anyone has any information about whether that's going to be done in time to influence this process. Thank you.
And thank you. I'll turn to Brian quickly in a moment, but first, I'd like to hear from Dylan Giambattista from VGS. Dylan,
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
we can. I can.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very brief. I know you have a lot to get to. Dylan Giambattista from VGS Vermont Gas. Just want to weigh in quickly on the topic of emissions inventory. And we just want to flag that GREET is a tested model. It certainly reflects upstream and downstream emissions, and that many other jurisdictions are using it successfully. So we would support its use consistent with the Act's requirements. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Brian, in response to Mr. and I will not pronounce
Excuse
it
me,
this time.
this is Thomas Weiss, telephone person. I don't know if you've
Okay.
seen me
Oh,
on that.
okay.
I'm
Forgive me.
unmuted.
Yep. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Weiss.
Thank you. I've got about 3 comments. One on the characterizations. I think I'm arguing that all measures that are installed, such as a heat pump, should be based on the thermal energy efficiency improvements and weatherization having been done already, whether it has or not. And this has to do with the interactions between the thermal heat measures. Installing a heat pump in a house that still needs the thermal energy efficiency improvements and weatherization will result in excess cost for the heat pump that is too large for the ultimate goal for the house. The second is, and this was raised by a few of the TAG members after I wrote it down, I'm not sure that a measure mix is needed or useful. The credits are based on greenhouse gas emissions, so it's not necessary to make assumptions as to what the mixes will be. The person who said it's a matter of the difference between what's burned now and what will be burned in the future is correct, because you'll have those values directly for each installation. Third question is, how does one communicate with the TAG as a public body? I'm allowed to contact my select board between select board meetings, and I'm wondering whether being a party to the proceeding, which I am, to both of them, 2220 and 2221, alters that. Fourth comment, where do I find the potential study page on the department site? I've done a brief search and I haven't been able to find it.
Let me just
Those
answer
are my
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. I would say and we can amend this if I'm wrong, but you can communicate with the TAG by making filings with the PUC as a participant in the dockets, and we will see all of those. And you also are communicating with us right now, which is terrific. As for the link,
Can I get back to that? Can I just send in a comment today saying I'd like to comment on this about TAG proceedings, or do I have to only respond to an order?
well, I'll turn to Deirdre and Tom, but I think you can file a comment anytime you want with the PUC. It's always been the case, as I recall.
And those would get forwarded to the TAG?
All filings in the document in these dockets are available to the TAG and we're noticed of them on them. So yes.
Thank you on that part.
The question as to where on the department's web page he can find the TJ.
So yeah, we just got a signed contract maybe a week ago or 10 days ago. We're in the process of putting up on our webpage, so we don't have that, but I expect in the near future we will have a web page that hopefully the PUC can link from its page, and we will be kind of soliciting a stakeholder list. We'll send out to the lists that we have now and say, if you want to be notified, like we'll probably do like a monthly newsletter about this for a while, or every 6 weeks or something. And so to try and kind of keep the communication up on the potential study, including a few outside of TAG type presentations as well. So it's coming soon.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Presampieri, your hand is still up. Did you have a second comment?
No, I'm sorry.
That's no problem. No problem. Okay. I'd like to end this portion of the agenda. Is there anything more that we, at this point, we need to discuss? Okay, good. Then I'm gonna try to limit the next set. I really do want to respect everybody's time commitment here. I'd like to limit the next discussion on credit ownership to 15 minutes at most, so that we can just take up a couple other issues. I think they'll be able to be disposed of quickly, but let's start there. Dylan?
Rick, I would just like to clarify, according to Robert's rules, you cannot limit discussion on an item without a vote. However, you are more than welcome to suggest that the tag sticks to 15 minutes.
Okay. Yes, fair enough. Right. I wouldn't. Yes. Thank you. We'll do our best, but I won't limit
Rick,
discussion.
I think we'll have to give you that reminder every meeting. We'll take all of Rick's timing guidance as suggestions.
Yes. Forgive me for that. Okay. Deirdre, I'm going to turn to you. You're going to start off, I believe, giving us an idea of the general range of comments on the question of credit ownership.
Yeah, so I'll try and go pretty quickly here. So this is obviously something that was bumped to this meeting from last meeting. In terms of clarifying the tag's role, we're statutorily required to consult with the tag on this to establish a standard methodology for determining what party or parties shall be the owner of a clean heat credit upon its creation. The owner or owners may transfer those credits to a third party or to an obligated party. So that's the statute on it. Public process, we've gotten comments on this. We had a workshop in December and we had reply comments, 2 weeks ago come in. Kind of broad methodologies for structure that have been submitted in the public process have been whoever pays the most for a measure should be the credit owner. The credit should be proportionally owned based on the funds applied to pay for the measure. Credit ownership should apply to obligated parties that import, deliver, or install eligible clean heat measures. That's been further boiled down to just delivered fuel. So credit ownership should be based on the measure installed or based on the measure. So delivered fuel should automatically go with the fuel supplier, whereas installed measures should be treated differently. Ownership should be primarily a causation-based determination in which the entity who took the most significant actions to cause the measure to be installed would be the initial owner. Along the same lines, all parties that created opportunities for the clean heat market to grow and the but-for test should be applied to determine ownership of clean heat credits upon completion of a clean heat measure, as in the project would not have occurred but for the influence or intervention from the measure. And some concerns, really briefly, are complications with Tier 3, confusion to customers if they're presented with multiple agreements on ownership from multiple funders, asking whether the credit is minted when the measure is installed or delivered or once the measure is verified by the department, and then just generally the high administrative cost of credit verification or allocation if ownership is split among many entities. Tom, how would you like to add to that?
I may have missed this, but another suggestion is that the customer would be the owner of the clean heat credit.
Yes, that's pretty critical. Thanks. I think that's my spiel of a high level kind of rundown of what suggestions have been submitted.
Great, thank you. So I think a question before the tag is, what do we think about this? Do we want to weigh in on it? What do we have to offer here? Ken has some thoughts on it. I know others in the group have thoughts on it. We may want to weigh in, and if that's the case, I think we'd want to think about a process for doing so. So I'll open it up to folks and their thoughts.
Would it make sense for Ken to walk through his memo in case everybody hasn't had a chance to review it?
Sure, Ken, if you're willing to, you've
Yeah, and
raised.
I'll try to make it really short, in part by addressing what a lot of folks that participated in the workshop are saying. You know, essentially, if I paid for it, I get it. But I want to note that most of the people that have paid into incentives, those programs have been authorized by the legislature or are budgeted through the Public Utility Commission, and they were all done without any expectation that they would be compensated through a credit program. What I'm talking about, and this is my, a big thrust of what I'm saying here, there is a difference between early action credits. In other words, those installations that have taken place from January 1st, 2023 to some point certain when the PUC rules about credit ownership. Everyone says, "Oh, I'm being mean here, but oh, I should get credit for that." I think is faulty economic reasoning. Those installations took place absent, I will say, any understanding that they'd be compensated through the clean heat measurement process. If that's wrong, we need to know it. And so I suggest one thing the PUC put out there is if there is an entity that has been making investments in clean heat measures based upon an assumption that they are going to be compensated, they need to let us know. And that includes the obligated entities. If they're spending money to put in clean heat measures, we need to be aware of that so that we can count that in. So anyway, I have two pieces to this. One I think is fairly simple. At some date certain, the PUC should require all measure installations to have a paper trail. And I believe it starts with the building owner, and the building owner, when they agree to have a program put in place, a project put in place, and they are compensated by incentive payments from either electric utility or Efficiency Vermont or an obligated entity or OEO, Agency of Human Services, they sign off and say, yeah, you folks get it. And yeah, the folks are going to have to agree as to how that happens, but it gets back to my earlier comment. Every one of those programs is in place not to make clean heat credit values, but to accomplish other things. So I hope it doesn't become a pissing match among those incentive providers about who should get the credits, because at some point when the market is established, the incentive amounts should increase because they'll be getting clean heat credit payments. So that's at some point certain. I don't know when the date should be, hopefully sometime in 2024. Sharply defined from this point forth, the Public Utility Commission will only accept credits that have that paper trail, which then leads us to what do we do about these credits that have happened from January 1st to that date certain? And you see my suggestion there that find the entity that can essentially say can get them for free, because they're all the three suggestions I have each have a public good. Them getting them for free, yes, they will get revenues, but those revenues will be directed by their public good.
Thanks, Ken. Matt?
Can I just second what Ken said, but then offer sort of context from those that are earning credits now or potentially earning credits now? So these are the heating contractors.
Please.
And these are also the obligated parties that are also installing or selling what could potentially be clean heat measures. And that is to say, we created a form, the Heating and Cooling Contractors of Vermont organization that I work with. And we also asked for guidance from the Public Utility Commission. And we did receive a response to that, which I think is instructive, but to Ken's point, it is not clear. So it provides details on what we should be collecting as entities that provide clean heat, potential clean heat products and services that could potentially earn credits. But I agree with Ken, there absolutely needs to be something more formal than suggested a data collection methodology. in order to establish credit. Because I'll tell you, if anyone sells a gallon of biodiesel, they may be making an investment in their trucks, in their training, in their customers' awareness of it, and they want to retain that credit by making that investment. Similar to if they're installing a heat pump or installing a wood pellet stove. The people that are doing that may not be giving a direct rebate to the customer, but they may also be providing a legal form in which that credit is then assigned to them. And whether that holds up in the Public Utility Commission, well, we're going to find out. But yes, the urgency to create a level playing field where everyone's working off the same methodology and not just on a form that we have created on the advice of the PUC on what we should be collecting in order to ascribe credit. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. TJ.
Yeah, so I don't disagree that there should be a clear form and indication of what is certainty for obligated entities who are taking action to know what they're doing. But I want to just kind of raise what exactly is the role of the tag here. We've already kind of talked about the measure characterization and what is the value, and Ken has raised the question of should there be a different value for early action credits than there is for quote unquote regular credits, right? The future ones. And I think that question is probably a good one for the tag because we're talking about credit values but I'm not sure if there's another question for us to answer. And then I'll just, for my part, I don't think the statute really differentiates between ownership of energy action credits or early action credits and other credits, and that, the credit should be the same, the value should be the same, and then the ownership should be the same. There's not like a ownership, there's not a clear differentiation there, and that may create a windfall for if you want to use that term, or benefit for those early movers under the clean heat standard, those that are taking on risk and getting making investments, or those that are already kind of making investments under their current programs. But I think that was the intent of the statute, and so is to provide value to those entities. Otherwise, I think legislation would have been written in a different way. So in terms of credit ownership, I don't think there should be any sort of devaluing of early action credits or different ownership of them. But that part's debatable. I do think that's a question for the tag and the question around credit ownership that this group should answer.
Thanks, TJ. Luz?
I'm just commenting on credit ownership, and an owner who buys renewable natural gas or biodiesel, they will want to get credit for that, right? Because they're paying extra for that fuel. So if only the delivery gets the credit, it doesn't seem like you're encouraging our municipalities, schools, hospitals, etc., that may want to buy renewable natural gas and make an impact, because they don't have a lot of options. They can't, they may not be able to do a lot of heat pumps in a hospital and get reduction. So I'm just throwing that out there. I think we have to think about that credit ownership.
Sure. I'm sure. It seems to me what you're raising there is that there's a difference between the incremental purchase of renewable natural gas or fuels and the amount of those fuels that is mixed in that a customer has to take regardless.
Right. There's two. You can pay for a certain amount of renewable natural gas, and you're paying quite a bit more for that. Right. So to not get any credit for that doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I understand.
It seems like it should be some kind of shared credit.
Okay, we have one more. Emily Levin, please.
Well, to Luz's point, I think I would differentiate between credit ownership and the flow of funds that derived from credit ownership to the actual kind of incentive that the customer receives. So presumably the way this is supposed to work is that, the people that are supporting these clean heat projects, whether that be a fuel dealer or a default delivery agent or an Efficiency Vermont, they're potentially, amassing credits, which they are then able to retire and be compensated for behind the scenes, but that some of the value of those credits is then passed along to their customers to facilitate adoption of clean heat measures. So I think we need to differentiate. I'm not sure that the entity actually receiving the credit is the only way that a given building owner or customer could ever benefit from the program. I think lots of entities might choose to funnel their, earnings from this program into incentives. And I just wanted to note that I think there's a differentiation between kind of the front end and the back end there.
Sure. And Matt?
Just to tag up, I mean, I think TJ's point is clear. How much time is the tag devoting to credit ownership? I'm not making a judgment here. I'm asking genuinely because it is incredibly vexing. I mean, I've thought about how to assign credits because I've got people that are doing things and want to know what the value is and how to attain that value for making those investments. And I almost think it's another group that has to. I don't know. I'm just embracing the challenge of how we in fact determine who gets the credit, because that credit has a dollar value attached to it because that's what the obligated party will pay. But it doesn't necessarily mean any money for the ultimate end user. No one has to receive, in some ways, a user of someone who installs a heat pump at their house or has B100 biodiesel delivered to their house. They are purchasing that, but they don't have to. There's nothing in the law that says they have to receive $500 off that installation or 10 cents off a gallon, unless we determine that the credits shall only be earned by the end user. But I think if you do that, you are creating a chaotic system in which either the government would have to prop up something in order to aggregate those credits to provide value to them, or do that through a nonprofit, or you create a private market of credit aggregators that collect from consumers 1-2 credits at a time in order to sell to the obligated parties in essentially a private market. So I think this is a really important question that we're addressing. We can't do it in 15 minutes for sure.
No.
I'm not sure how we get to it.
Well, no, in fact, Matt, you're asking the question that I was going to ask, and that is, how do we want to proceed on this, if at all? Deirdre has kindly summarized the comments that folks have submitted to the PUC on this. Forgive me for not remembering. At some point or another, the PUC is going to dispose of this issue in one way or another. Is it ultimately going to be part of the rule? Is there going to be something interim? So, Tom, Deirdre, you may have a thought here. I just don't know. I mean, forgive my ignorance on this. But the question for us is, do we feel that there's something that we might want to say that would help the PUC in its deliberations? And if so, how do we want to get there? Tom? And then Ken, sorry.
Yeah, so the commission is required by statute to resolve this question and to do so in consultation with the TAG. We've heard from Matt and others that there's a desire for the commission to resolve this sooner than later. And so at least at the staff level, that's our intent. That's why this was raised early in the proceeding, and we've already had multiple pieces of process on this question. So I think right now the question is, does the TAG want to come up with a methodology and send that to the commission, and the commission will deliberate and decide whether and how to adopt the TAG's recommendation? Or would it be more helpful for the commission to come up with a proposal and then bring that to the tag, and that would presumably constitute that consultation role that's required by statute, and then take the tag's feedback to finalize the commission's determination.
Ken, yeah, I think you were up next.
Yeah, and maybe this responds, but I think this is a topic. I heard a lot of comments just now that, open up all sorts of issues with regards to the market. And I think it's possible that this may be a working group to really flesh out market scenarios. And ownership is one part of it. But also it's going to get to this interaction between the DDA and the obligated entities, and but it's a massive topic, and maybe not everyone here wants to be involved in it, and it could take a long time. And so maybe if we set up a working group that can exchange some pieces of paper, but then have a meeting or two or three and ultimately more to really to structure the market discussion a little bit. And I don't know if it can be done in a timely enough fashion to get to Tom's kind of question to us. Can we then provide a solution for the commission? Maybe not. Maybe the commission does need to draft their solution and then have us react. But a question to this body, is this a working group? And one that I can very well imagine does adhere to the open meeting rule stuff. We'd post meetings and other people might going to want to participate. But it's such a huge subset that if we keep having these market discussions here, our meetings are going to be long.
Right. Thank you. Emily Roscoe.
Yeah, just responding to what Tom responded with. Efficiency Vermont supports the opportunity for the tag to maybe respond to the commission's first draft of what they come up with.
TJ?
Yeah, I agree with Emily there. I think this is a policy issue first and foremost, and I think the consultation with this group will have most value for this group to identify technical issues that arise from the draft policy. And so I think commission bringing the draft to this group makes both practical sense in terms of timing and is just the right role for this committee.
Thanks. Other thoughts? Let's hear from the public. If there are any members of Tom, your hand just went up. Or did you mean that to happen?
That's a holdover.
Okay. Let's hear from any members of the public who want to chime in on this, and then let's take a moment or two to decide on the course of action, because I think I'm hearing two suggestions for next steps on this matter, and so I just want to clarify that. Mr. Porter, Pike Porter.
Yes, hi. I just believe that in the discussion about ownership, if the owner of a property or owner of a system that is installed, the end user is not going to be the owner of the credit because they have given it away or transferred it to the installer or whoever, there needs to be a clear, simple disclosure of the fact that they are remitting that clean heat credit to the installer. It shouldn't be buried in any paperwork. Just needs to be abundantly clear. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. As I said, I thought I've heard two approaches. One is Emily and TJ suggest that we wait to see what the PUC proposes and then we respond to it. Ken was proposing, I think, a little more proactive, and that's an expression I hate, a more immediate action. Any thoughts one way or the other that we might want to consider? And then if someone wants to make a motion one way or the other, that'd be great. Ken.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. No, I agree with TJ and Emily. I
Oh.
believe that the PUC should draft and then we can react to it. My issue is this is one example of the market, and I would like to begin to discuss the overall market reaction. How is this market being established? What does it really mean? And we can use ownership as a topic for our discussion, and I think that will help when we receive a product from the PUC. It will help us structure our response. But yeah, no, I fully support PUC coming up with a draft answer. It'll take us a long time to do it.
Well, then, so your request then, and I'll turn to you in a moment, Liz. Your request then is that we make sure this in various ways remains part of our agendas. Is that fair? That we come back to this
market? Yeah.
Yes.
To the extent that this is an example of this establishing the market, yeah, it's going to be. Yeah, I don't think I don't need to make a motion on that. Yeah. That's a given.
Okay.
We're gonna keep running up against this.
Yep. No, it's good. Liz, please. Thank you.
I think we would still want a working group to evaluate the PUC document, that we would still want to. That's going to take a lot of work itself. And I think you still want a mini working group that then reports back to the board. That's to the group.
Great. That makes sense. But I would imagine we don't need to create that group this moment. Folks can think if they, can give some thought to whether they want to participate in it, and we can have that conversation. That'd be great. So if that makes sense, is there any action that we need to take? It doesn't sound like there is. Dominic will tell me if I'm wrong.
If the group does not want to create a subgroup or a subcommittee, a working group, whatever phrase you want to use today, then no parliamentary action is necessary.
Great, thank you. Ken?
Yeah. So my suggestion is, and I you can start yelling at me, but I'm very prepared for our next meeting to scope out what a working group on the market would look like, the kinds of questions, kind of topics for, I'll say, for recruitment, to say, yeah, should we form one on this market issue? But right, requiring no action today, but just to prepare that that's a possibility we might work towards at the next meeting.
Thank you. TJ?
Yeah, I'm fine with that being on the agenda. I was just going to ask the PUC if they need some sort of resolution from us to say, this is what we want you to do, or if this discussion is sufficient that we've had.
Speaking for myself, I view the discussion as sufficient. There's enough wiggle room in the statute about how this proceeds, and the PUC can use its discretion to bring this question to the tag.
Right. Matt, I saw that do you have something to add?
Oh, I was just going to be brief, and I just think that I consider me recruited, Ken, and I'm happy to share what we've created, what our attorney has created in order to establish credit ownership. Not saying that's going to be the final result, but it's the only thing we've got right now, and we're earning credits as we speak. And then also, I think it's good to hold off deciding who wants to be on it, because the PUC may ask us specific questions to opine on regarding credit ownership. So I think we're doing the right thing. That's all.
Okay. Well then, I don't know that we need a motion here, but we'll make sure this is on the agenda for next week. Again, Dominic, I'll turn to you. Ken has said that he's happy to think this through and provide some thoughts about it for the next meeting. Do we need to task him to do that, or we just assume that anyone can do that at the next meeting?
No, this conversation and any information that Ken sends you will substantiate a suggestion for the agenda. Use the chair in consultation with Emily as the vice chair. Sounds like we'll choose to have it on the agenda. Any preparatory materials that you both deem necessary, maybe a memo or other suggestions from Ken, can be included in next week's or the next meeting's folder.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Emily, Roscoe.
Yeah, I'm just curious if the commission has any sort of timeline for when they'd have something to put in front of the tag related to credit ownership to react to.
I couldn't say anything right now, Emily.
Okay,
As
thank
you
you.
know, plates are full.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. If there's nothing else on this topic, we've got 3 more matters on the agenda. Item 8, other matters. I put in emissions scheduling. I really should have put schedule. It refers to a particular provision in the act, and carbon intensity. Given the time constraints, I'd recommend that we table these issues. But please, any thoughts one way or the other? We've touched on a lot
Parliamentary.
of matters. Oh, can I? Okay, Dominic's going to tell me
Rick,
I've done it wrong.
That's all right. Parliamentary suggestion. You'd have one of 2 options. You could look favorably on a motion to table these issues. You could also ask consent of the group to revisit these at the next meeting.
Well, I'll go with the consent. I will ask that. TJ, though, you had something to say.
Consent.
Okay. I see thumbs up. Do I take a vote on consent? I guess I do, or do I? Nope.
No, you do not. No, you do not take a vote. In asking consent, people have the opportunity to object. We have had no objection, so if anyone would like to object, now is your time to do it. And if not, we would move on to the next agenda item, which is 9, scheduling of tag meetings.
Right. Hearing no objections, let's move on to 9. The scheduling of tag meetings. We've discussed this several times. We want to regularize the meetings. I had suggested earlier. I told you what I was thinking. Do we have thoughts about this? We want to regularize them. I'd love to be able to make a decision on this today about when would be a good time. Folks have thoughts? Go ahead, Emily. Nothing.
I was just curious whether this slot would work for, I mean, it's scheduling such a large group on the fly is an exercise that's going to take us more than 60 seconds.
Well, I was hoping to get it away from Friday myself. Fridays are awkward. I mean, I'll do whatever. Then the PC, and there you see, Dominic says the PUC would prefer to avoid Tuesday mornings and Wednesdays. I had a sense that Thursdays would be better for the PUC. Again, it's what works for us. In any case, we do need to schedule our next meeting. So, let me just ask, and I don't know that we're doing it entirely on the fly, Emily, but how does, 2 weeks from yesterday look on people's calendars? Or we could make it 3 weeks if we wanted, but I'd like to keep moving. I really feel like, and this goes to the next question I'm going to ask, but I'd like to keep us at it. Ken?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of us, but just I'm obligated on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons from 1 to 5. So I'd need to be really done a meeting at 12:30 on Wednesdays and Thursdays. I can change that but that's my desire.
Thank you. What would a 9:30 to 12:30 and the hope that we finish by 12 time slot work? How would that work folks on the West Coast might not like it, but
Are we looking at the 15th?
is that Thursday? I got to pull up that would be, yes. That's what we're looking at. That's what I'm suggesting in any case. Floyd is traveling that day. TJ? Oh, doesn't, okay. 2:15 doesn't work for you, but otherwise it works. Well, then what about the 16th? And then we go to Thursdays thereafter. I don't see violent disagreement with that. Great. Okay. And how do we deal with this in parliamentary terms, Dominic?
I would suggest a motion to hold the next meeting on February 16th at whatever time the group is interested in.
Okay. And what about further Thursdays thereafter?
That could absolutely be part of that motion.
Okay. Every 2 weeks for the next 2 months, let's say. Would someone, and I would say 10 o'clock at this point, and we're still at 10 o'clock. This seems to work for folks.
So I move that our next meeting be on February 16th from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and future meetings starting on March, whatever date that is, Thursdays, 9:30 to 12:30.
Do I have is there a second?
Just one note real quick, Chair.
Yes.
For those who follow California's programs, the third Thursday of every month is usually their board hearing, the California Air Resources Board. So just FYI.
Okay. Well,
I tend to attend those, but that's okay. I can work around it.
When do they start?
They start around 9 a.m. Pacific Standard,
which is noon.
Yeah, noon here. It'll be a long day for you, but okay.
Okay.
We're still in the middle of the motion, though. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Now discussion. And we've got Floyd's point on that. Luce?
I was just trying to understand, are we starting that March 7th or March 14th? Which?
It would, let me pull up the calendar here.
So 2 weeks later is actually February 29th, which
right.
is a full season week in Vermont. So I'm expecting that at least some of us may have conflicts that week. We were to actually start shifting. I happen to have a conflict the week of the 11th too. So if we did shift it back a week, that might, I don't know. It's just gets messy.
It's going to be hard to accommodate everyone. I think. Dominic? Oh, yep. Okay.
And we're sticking with 3-hour meetings rather than meeting shorter more frequently, right? That's what people want. They want the 3-hour.
See you later, Emily. That's what the motion is for at this point. We can try to make them shorter in the agenda, but we'll hold the time.
Yeah, I think eventually it would be good to try and get them to 2 hours. 3 hours is a big commitment. But
it is.
I think the next one is probably still a 3-hour meeting.
Ken?
Yeah, so I just want to formalize. So February 16th, 10 to 1, March 6th, and every other Thursday, 9:30 to 12:30. That's what my motion is intended to be.
So I think it's March 7th, right?
No.
Thank you. Help me.
Yes, March 7th. That's
March
correct.
7th. Thank you.
But your motion, I want to be clear. You're actually putting 3 weeks between the next meeting and the one after that.
Correct.
Okay. That's the reason I gather. Okay. Any further discussion? Dominic? Oh, no, you're okay. Well then, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, that's great. Okay, last thing. Are there any other matters? I wanted to take, I know it's late, we're 6 minutes over, but I want to give the members of the public one last chance if there are any other issues that they want to comment on before we close. I want to give members a chance to do so. I don't see any comments, okay, or desire to comment. Are there any other matters? Oh, are there any other matters? I see Luce. Yes, you raised your
Just,
hand. Thank you,
I
Peg.
did check at break and I didn't get a notice for the workshop last week, so I would just request to get for 2221 that we also get requests emailed to us for those workshops. It's hard to check the PUC webpage, but I do check emails on a regular basis. So thank you.
Thank you, Luce. I find that more stuff is going into my junk folder these days than I had used to. Okay, if there's nothing else, I want to thank you all for this, and I'm sorry that we've gone over time, but this was terrific. I think we got a lot of good work done. You'll be hearing from us. I'll be talking to the folks at the PUC and to Emily. Off you go. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you very much.